The sun was blazing that afternoon when chaos erupted right in front of my house. One moment the street was quiet, the hum of lawnmowers, kids on bikes, neighbors tending flowers. The next black smoke billowed into the sky as flames tore through my wife's black SUV, turning our peaceful cul-de-sac into a spectacle. Neighbors rushed out, shielding their eyes from the glare phones held high to capture the drama under the unforgiving daylight. And there she was, Karen, our self-appointed queen of the HOA, standing smug in the driveway, clutching a red gas can like a trophy, shouting that she was protecting the neighborhood. What she didn't know, what no one suspected, was that the car she torched wasn't just any vehicle. It belonged to my wife, the county sheriff, and Karen had just declared war on the law itself in broad daylight. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is right now. When we first moved into Maple Crest Estates, I thought we had stumbled into some postcard version of suburbia. White fences, manicured lawns, kids selling lemonade under the hot sun, it all looked like something out of a real estate brochure. But what those glossy pictures never show you is the parasite lurking underneath. And in our case, that parasite had a name, Karen. Now, Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, a woman who wore her power like a badge. While the rest of us wore t-shirts and shorts to survive the midday heat, she strutted up and down the cul-de-sac in her neon-colored blouses, wide-brimmed hat, and that ever-present clipboard clutched to her chest like a holy scripture. If the devil ever applied for a desk job, I'm convinced he'd show up looking exactly like Karen, lipstick-smeared sunglasses too big, and a voice that could cut through steel. At first I thought she was just quirky. Every HOA has its busybody right, someone who lives for tattling. But then the little notes started showing up. Bright yellow slips tucked under our door, fluttering in the hot breeze like unwanted invitations. Your lawn exceeds the HOA standard height. Trash cans must be removed within 45 minutes of pickup. Driveway oil stains violate community cleanliness policy. Nonsense. Absolute nonsense. We were barely unpacked before she started policing us. And you could tell she got a rush out of it. Her handwriting was so perfect, so smug, like every letter was carved with superiority. At first, my wife laughed. She'd hold up the notes while sipping her iced tea, sunlight glinting off her sheriff's badge that she hadn't even bothered to put away yet. She doesn't know who she's messing with, she'd say with that calm, steady grin. But I'll admit I wasn't laughing, because behind the community rules jargon I could smell the stench of something uglier. It wasn't about grass or garbage cans, it was about us. You see, Maple Crest Estates was the kind of neighborhood where everyone looked the same, sounded the same, drove the same silver sedans, and waved politely at the same Sunday BBQs. My wife, a strong black woman who carried herself with authority and didn't bow her head for anyone. She was a disruption to Karen's little kingdom, and Karen wasn't about to let that slide. The car was the tipping point. My wife's black SUV wasn't just a vehicle, it was practically an extension of her. Sturdy, spotless, always parked neatly in our driveway, catching the sunlight like polished obsidian. To me, it looked like strength. To Karen, it looked like rebellion. One afternoon, I found her circling the SUV like a hawk. Clipboard in hand, pen tapping against her teeth, she squinted at the license plate, then crouched down to inspect the tires like she was running a crime scene. "Excuse me," I said, walking out in the blazing heat. Sweat was already soaking through my shirt. "Is there a problem?" She straightened up, plastered on that fake tight-lipped smile, and said, "Just ensuring compliance. This vehicle," she gestured with her pen like she was pointing at a corpse. "It doesn't exactly fit the neighborhood aesthetic." I blinked. Neighborhood aesthetic. It's a car. It drives. It parks. "What more do you want?" Her smile faltered for half a second before she snapped back. "It's intimidating. It lowers property values. This is a family community, not..." She stopped herself, but I knew where she was going. "Not a place for people like you." That was the moment I realized Karen's war wasn't about rules. It was about control. I told my wife that night over dinner. She barely looked up from her plate, just raised an eyebrow and said, "Let her play her little games." She was calm, almost amused. But me, I felt the temperature rising, and it wasn't just the summer sun. Days turned into weeks, and the harassment kept coming. More notes, more warnings. Neighbors started whispering when we walked by, their faces flushed not just from the heat but from fear of crossing Karen. A few brave ones gave us sympathetic nods, but none dared to stand up for us. That's the thing about HOA power, it thrives on silence. And still, Karen's obsession zeroed in on that SUV. She complained it blocked the view of the cul-de-sac. She claimed it cast unpleasant reflections on nearby houses when the sun hit it. She even tried to argue that its military style made the neighborhood unsafe. Each excuse was more ridiculous than the last. One particularly scorching afternoon, I caught her snapping photos of it while crouched behind her flower bed. She must have thought I couldn't see her, but there she was, sweat dripping down her temples, blouse sticking to her back, angling her phone like she was documenting a crime scene. I almost laughed, almost. But something in her eyes stopped me. That wasn't just nosiness. That was obsession. An obsession under the midday sun. That kind of madness can boil over. I wish I could say I didn't see what was coming. That I was blindsided. But the truth. The moment Karen's eyes locked on that SUV, I knew this wasn't going to end with yellow slips and whispered gossip. This was building into something bigger, nastier. The flames didn't start that day. But the spark, oh, it was already lit. The thing about people like Karen is they don't back off when you ignore them. They take silence as encouragement, like weeds pushing through concrete. And in the glare of the midday sun, her madness only seemed to grow. It started with confrontations. One afternoon, my wife pulled into the driveway after her shift. She had her sunglasses on, uniform shirt tucked neatly into her trousers, the picture of calm authority. She'd barely killed the engine when Karen stormed across the street like a heat wave in human form, sweat shining on her forehead, clipboard tucked under one arm. "This has to stop," she barked, her voice echoing across the cul-de-sac. "That monstrosity of a car is ruining our neighborhood image." My wife didn't even flinch. She opened the door, stepped out, and stood tall under the beating sun. "It's called a vehicle," she said dryly. "Most people own one." Karen's face twitched. You could practically see the steam rising from her scalp. "Don't get smart with me. This community has rules, and if you think you're above them, you're dead wrong." I stepped out of the house, then crossing the hot pavement barefoot just to make sure things didn't escalate. "Karen," I said, shielding my eyes from the light, "go home. It's a car, not a crime scene." She jabbed her pen in my direction. "You think this is funny? Property values are dropping because of people like you." Ah, there it was. That ugly undertone she always danced around, slipping out in the open daylight. My wife just raised an eyebrow, cool as ice, under the sweltering sun. "If you're that worried about property values, maybe stop harassing your neighbors in front of everyone's cameras." She tilted her chin toward the phones already recording from porches. Maplecrest loved a spectacle, and Karen was always more than happy to provide. But the cameras didn't stop her. If anything, they fueled her. Soon she wasn't just shouting in the street. She started sending her so-called HOA security after us. Now let me paint this for you: two overweight guys in mismatched tactical vests, the words HOA security ironed on the back like some bargain bin cosplay. They strutted around in the sun batons, dangling from their belts, faces red and dripping with sweat. The first time they showed up, I thought it was a prank. They waddled up the driveway, one of them wiping his forehead with the back of his arm, and announced, "You've been issued an official citation for non-compliance." I stared at the paper they handed me. It was nothing more than a sheet of printer paper with the HOA logo pasted at the top, accusing us of vehicular disturbance. Vehicular disturbance, I nearly laughed out loud, but my wife didn't laugh. She leaned against her SUV, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "Do either of you understand that impersonating law enforcement is a criminal offense?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. The two men froze their eyes, darting to each other. One stammered, We're just doing what Karen said." My wife didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "Then tell Karen she can deliver her nonsense in person next time. And don't ever set foot on my property again." They left in a hurry, muttering about just following orders. And of course Karen was watching from across the street, sunglasses, flashing lips pressed into a smug line. The harassment didn't stop there. If anything, it escalated. Karen filed noise complaints, even when our house was silent. She scribbled warnings about our trash bins, even though we placed them exactly where the city code said we should. She even tried to claim that the shade from our tree was violating light distribution standards. Yes, apparently our oak tree was guilty of depriving her begonias of direct sunlight. It was ridiculous. But beneath the ridiculousness, there was venom. Every action was meant to wear us down, to humiliate my wife, to strip away her composure. The thing is, it didn't work. One afternoon I came home from running errands to find my wife washing the SUV garden hose in hand water sparkling in the sunlight. Karen was across the street screaming about wasting water. Neighbors peeked through curtains, some openly standing on their porches, fans in hand, watching the showdown like it was daytime television. My wife didn't shout back. She didn't even acknowledge Karen's existence. She just kept washing the SUV, humming softly to herself. The more Karen yelled, the calmer she became. The contrast was maddening. For Karen, anyway. I remember leaning against the porch post, sipping my iced tea, watching Karen's face turn beet red under the sun, Her sunglasses slipped down her nose, sweat pouring, voice cracking as she shrieked about HOA violations. Meanwhile, my wife looked like she belonged in a commercial for Serenity water droplets glinting off her skin, calm as ever. And that's when it hit me. Karen wasn't just angry. She was desperate. Desperate to provoke a reaction, to see my wife snap, to confirm whatever twisted picture she'd painted in her mind. But my wife, she gave her nothing. That was the real victory in those moments. Not shouting her down, not matching her pettiness, but starving her of the reaction she craved. Still, I could feel something brewing. The way Karen's hands trembled, the way her voice cracked louder each day, the way she lingered by our driveway even when she had no reason to. It was like watching a storm form under a blazing sky. You know, the kind where the clouds aren't there yet, but the air feels heavy charged, like lightning is hiding just out of sight. And I knew one thing: storms like that don't just pass. They break. Karen wasn't finished. No, she was just getting started. You'd think that after weeks of shrieking across driveways, phony citations, and HOA security cosplay, Karen would have burned herself out. But no, Karen wasn't running on logic. She was running on obsession. And obsession doesn't cool off in the shade. It builds, it festers, and eventually it explodes. The explosion came on the day of the HOA meeting. Now, most HOA meetings in Maple Crest Estates were about as exciting as watching paint dry under the noon sun. Arguments over mailbox colors, debates about hedge heights, thrilling stuff. But this one had the energy of a gladiator arena. The clubhouse parking lot overflowed, neighbors fanning themselves with folded flyers as they shuffled into the airless meeting room. Sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, turning the place into a greenhouse. Sweat shone on every forehead before the meeting even started. And right there, front and center, was Karen. Clipboard tucked under her arm like a sword, neon orange blouse, practically glowing under the sunbeams, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. She looked less like a board president and more like a dictator on parade. The meeting began with routine nonsense: budget reports, landscaping updates, a heated side debate about whether the pool rules should include no floaties over 3 feet wide. But everyone knew why they were really there. Everyone was waiting for Karen's turn. When the floor opened for community issues, she pounced. Karen marched to the front, cleared her throat, and slammed a stack of glossy photographs onto the podium. The sound echoed through the hot room. Necks craned, fans slowed. She spread the photos like a poker hand, each one a close-up shot of my wife's SUV. This, she announced, her voice slicing through the thick air, is the disease infecting our neighborhood. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some gasped, some snickered, some rolled their eyes. I sat in the back, arms crossed, jaw tight. My wife sat beside me, posture soldier straight, eyes forward. Karen launched into her speech. For months we have tolerated this eyesore. An oversized militaristic vehicle parked defiantly on a driveway where children play and families strive for peace. It looms over our cul-de-sac, casting a shadow on everything this community stands for. Property values have plummeted. Families feel unsafe. And yet, despite repeated citations, despite warnings, the owners have shown no respect for our standards. Her words dripped with venom, each sentence punctuated by the sweat dripping down her temples. She pulled out charts, she'd drawn arrows pointing to supposed crime spikes since we'd moved in. She waved letters she'd written to county officials demanding intervention. The room buzzed with murmurs. Some nodded along their eyes, darting toward us with nervous guilt. Others looked down at their laps, unwilling to meet my gaze. A few shook their heads, disgust written plain across their faces. Karen, drunk on her own performance, pressed harder. If the board refuses to act, then we as residents must. I will not stand by while one family drags us all into ruin. If necessary, I will take matters into my own hands. That last line hung heavy in the sunlit air. She wasn't just talking about fines or meetings anymore. She was promising action. I felt my blood boil. I opened my mouth to fire back, but my wife's hand brushed my arm, steady, calm, commanding me to stay seated. She hadn't said a word the entire time, but her silence was louder than Karen's rant. Still, I studied her face. Her jaw was tight, her eyes narrowed. She wasn't rattled, but she wasn't amused anymore either. This wasn't just neighborhood drama, it was becoming personal. The board shuffled uncomfortably, clearly regretting letting Karen have the floor for so long. One member tried to intervene. Karen, perhaps we should table this discussion for next session, but Karen cut him off, slamming her fist against the podium. No, we've tabled it long enough. Either we rid ourselves of this menace, she jabbed her finger toward our row, every eye following, or I will. Gasps filled the room. My wife's hand slipped off my arm then. She sat perfectly still, but her gaze locked on Karen with a calm, lethal intensity that only I knew how to read. She wasn't scared. She wasn't even angry. She was calculating. The meeting broke down after that. People argued, some defending us, others siding with Karen, most just trying to escape the sauna of a room without choosing sides. The board hastily adjourned, papers fluttering as they scrambled away from the tension. We walked out together, the hot sun hitting us full in the face. Karen lingered outside, sunglasses back on, whispering with her security goons. She glanced at us as we passed, lips curled into a grin that didn't belong on a sane person. "She's not bluffing," I muttered once we were out of earshot. "No," my wife agreed, unlocking the SUV. Her voice was low, steady, the kind of voice that made even seasoned deputies listen. "She's not. But that's her mistake." I frowned, sliding into the passenger seat. "What do you mean?" She adjusted her sunglasses, started the engine and said, "Because when people like her finally act, they always go too far. And when they do, they give me everything I need." I didn't know then just how prophetic those words were. But the truth was already written in the sweat dripping down Karen's neck, in the wild gleam in her eyes, in the way she clenched her clipboard like a weapon. The sun wasn't setting on this feud. No, the fire was just about to start. It was one of those afternoons where the sun felt like it was trying to bake the whole street into clay. The kind of heat where you could fry an egg on the hood of a car, where even the birds gave up singing and hid in the trees. I was inside nursing a glass of lemonade when I heard the sound, metal clanging against metal. At first I thought it was construction, but when the noise was followed by frantic shouting, I bolted for the door. What I saw made my stomach drop. There, in the middle of our driveway, stood Karen. Her neon blouse clung to her like melted plastic, her wide-brimmed hat tilted awkwardly from sweat. In her hands was a red gas can. The smell of fuel stung the air, sharp and undeniable, carried on waves of heat. And just beyond her, streaks of liquid glistened on the pavement, trailing straight under my wife's SUV. "Karen!" I shouted, racing down the porch steps, my bare feet slapping hot concrete. "What the hell are you doing?" She whipped around, eyes, wild lips pulled back into a twisted grin. "I'm saving this neighborhood," she screamed, her voice cracking in the dry air. "I told you people didn't belong here. I told you this car was a threat. And since nobody listened now, I have to fix it myself." I froze halfway down the driveway. A lighter dangled from her free hand, gleaming in the sunlight. My wife came out, then calm as ever, her sheriff's training written all over her body language. She didn't shout, she didn't panic. She simply stood at the top of the porch, her voice carrying like steel through the heat. "Karen, put it down. Right now." But Karen was past reason. She yanked the lighter to life, with a snap, the tiny flame flickering against the daylight. In one motion, she tossed it toward the SUV. The world erupted. With a roar, the gasoline-ignited flames racing along the trail until they swallowed the SUV in a burst of fire. Black smoke coiled upward, blotting out the blue sky while neighbors screamed and scattered. Phones appeared, instantly recording from every angle. A chorus of gasps, shrieks, and frantic cries filled the street. The heat was immediate. Even from a distance, I could feel it slapping my skin, searing the air. The rubber of the tires screeched as they melted the windshield, cracked with a deafening pop, and the once pristine black paint bubbled into warped scars. Karen, she just stood there, chest-heaving, sweat, dripping face twisted with satisfaction. "I did it," she shouted over the roar of the flames. "I saved us all," neighbors shouted back at her. "Are you insane? You've lost your mind? My God, she burned it." Some backed away, horrified. Others held their phones higher, desperate for a better shot of the chaos. A few, I swear, were just glad someone was finally standing up to her, even if she had gone completely unhinged. I wanted to rush forward, but my wife's arm shot out, holding me back with surprising force. Her eyes never left the inferno, but her voice was calm, chillingly calm. "Don't," she said. "Not yet." "Not yet," I hissed, my throat raw from smoke. "She just torched your car." But my wife had already pulled out her phone. One hand steady, she dialed a number and lifted it to her ear. She spoke just 4 words. "It's time. Send them." And then she hung up. I stared at her, coughing from the smoke. "Who did you call?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned her gaze back to Karen, who was now parading in front of the burning SUV, like a victorious general gas can held high above her head. The heat waves distorted her figure, but her voice carried crystal clear. "This is what happens when people think they can ignore the rules. This is what happens when outsiders try to destroy our way of life. I am the HOA, and I will protect this neighborhood." Her words were madness, dripping with prejudice, radiating delusion. And yet some neighbors just stood frozen, too afraid to intervene. Others whispered, nervously torn between loyalty to the HOA queen and the horror of what they were watching. I clenched my fists, my heart hammering in my chest. But beside me, my wife didn't move. She just watched, waiting. Then, as if on cue, the distant wail of sirens pierced the heavy air. The sound grew louder, closer, cutting through the crackle of fire and the chaos of voices. Red and blue lights flashed against the haze of smoke washing across Karen's smug face. She turned toward the sound, and instead of fear, her lips curled into a smile. She thought she was being rescued. She thought the cavalry was coming for her. "Oh, thank God," she cried, stumbling into the street, waving her arms as if summoning her army. "Over here I did what you couldn't. I saved us." The fire raged on, neighbors scattered, and Karen's laughter echoed under the blazing afternoon sun. But what she didn't realize, what no one realized yet, was that she hadn't just lit my wife's SUV on fire. She'd lit the fuse on her own downfall. And the moment those cruisers pulled up, everyone was about to learn who my wife really was. The sirens grew louder until they weren't background noise anymore. They were the only sound in the world. The air itself seemed to vibrate as the sheriff's cruisers barreled down our sun-bleached streetlights, flashing tires crunching against the pavement. Neighbors gasped and scattered, shielding their eyes from the heat and the blinding strobes of red and blue cutting through the black smoke. And right there in the middle of the street stood Karen. Her hat had slipped sideways, sweat streaking down her temple, but her smile was wide, triumphant. She spread her arms like she was welcoming royalty. Finally, she shouted over the roar of engines, "You're here to handle these criminals." Her words hung heavy in the hot air, absurd against the sight of flames still eating through the SUV. The crackle of burning rubber and the occasional pop of glass seemed to laugh at her delusion. The first cruiser screeched to a halt, followed by two more. Doors flung open, deputies in full uniform spilling out, and instead of rushing toward Karen with thanks, they marched in perfect formation toward my wife. "Sheriff," one of them said, snapping a crisp salute under the midday sun. His face was flushed from the heat, but his posture was flawless, every muscle radiating respect. "We've secured the perimeter." The crowd went silent. The only sound was the fire chewing through metal and Karen's laugh sputtering out mid-breath. Her smile froze, her sunglasses sliding down the bridge of her nose as she blinked in confusion. "Sheriff?" She repeated the word, stumbling clumsily off her tongue. My wife stepped forward, then calm as always, her shadow long against the sunlit pavement. She removed her own sunglasses and clipped them to her uniform pocket. For the first time that day, her badge gleamed in full daylight, catching every eye, every lens of the recording phones. "That's right," she said, her voice low but carrying across the street with practiced authority. "Sheriff." The crowd erupted. Gasps, murmurs, and even a few cheers broke out as neighbors realized what had been sitting under their noses all along. People who had once whispered against us now whispered against Karen. But Karen, oh Karen, wasn't ready to surrender her crown. "No," she shrieked, her voice cracking. She pointed a trembling finger at my wife. "This is a setup. She can't be the sheriff. She's the problem, not me. Arrest her." The deputies didn't even glance at my wife. Their eyes locked on Karen. One of them, a burly man with a stern jaw, stepped forward. "Ma'am, drop the gas can." Karen blinked, confused, before realizing she still clutched the half-empty container. She held it tighter, knuckles white. "You don't understand. I did this for the community. She's lying to you. She's tricked you all." "Ma'am," the deputy repeated firmer, now hand resting on his holster. "Drop it." The tension snapped like a wire. Karen's smile flickered her confidence, leaking away under the weight of reality. Her knees wobbled, her chest heaved, and for a moment I thought she might finally break down, admit everything, and beg for forgiveness. But Karen was incapable of surrender. Instead, she spun to the crowd, her voice shrill and desperate. "Don't you see? She's the one ruining this neighborhood. She doesn't belong here. None of them do." That was it. The last nail in her coffin. Gasps turned to boos. Neighbors who had once nodded along with her tirades now recoiled, ashamed to be seen near her. Phones zoomed closer, capturing every ugly word spilling out of her mouth. The deputies moved in. In one swift motion, the gas can was kicked away, clattering across the pavement, and Karen's arms were twisted behind her back. The metallic snap of handcuffs rang out loud and final. She thrashed, screaming nonsense, her face red as the fire behind her. "You can't do this. I'm the HOA president. I make the rules here." My wife didn't flinch. She didn't gloat. She simply turned to the deputies and said, "Read her rights." And they did, loud enough for every neighbor to hear, loud enough for every phone to record. Karen's cries were drowned out by the calm, steady cadence of the law being spoken under the blazing sun. I stood there, my shirt damp with sweat and smoke, watching as Karen was dragged past us, her wide-brimmed hat tumbling onto the asphalt. The woman who had strutted around this neighborhood like a queen was now nothing more than a prisoner, red-faced and shrieking, her kingdom burning in the background. My wife finally looked at me then. Just one look, steady and quiet, but I understood everything in it. patience, justice. The kind of strength that doesn't need shouting or gloating, it just needs truth. Neighbors inched closer, some offering awkward smiles, others muttering apologies under their breath. The tide had shifted. The same people who once filmed our humiliation now filmed Karen's downfall. And me, I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not a loud laugh, not cruel, but the kind of laugh you can't hold in when you watch Karma arrive in full daylight wearing a badge and mirrored sunglasses. Because that was the moment everyone realized the truth. Karen hadn't just picked a fight with a neighbor. She hadn't just set fire to a car. She had declared war on the law itself, and the law had been living across the street all along. If you've never watched a self-proclaimed tyrant dragged away in handcuffs under the blazing afternoon sun, I highly recommend it. There's a certain poetry to it. One moment Karen was the queen of Maple Crest Estates, barking orders, holding her clipboard like a royal scepter. The next, she was stuffed into the back of a sheriff's cruiser, sweat dripping, screaming about conspiracies. The fire crews arrived, just as the deputies hauled her off, dousing what remained of the SUV. Thick clouds of black smoke turned to white steam, the metal frame hissing as it cooled. My wife's vehicle was gone, nothing but a charred skeleton now. Yet somehow watching Karen thrash in that back seat made the loss sting a little less. Neighbors huddled in clusters on the sidewalks, whispering. Phones buzzed with notifications as the footage spread like wildfire through group chats and Facebook pages. For years, Karen had used shame and gossip as her weapons, pointing fingers, dictating rules, manipulating silence. But now the gossip was about her. The shame was hers. I overheard snippets as I passed. She really lost it this time. Did you know she kept gasoline in her garage? My cousin already shared the video, over 100 views in 10 minutes. It was like a dam had broken. People who had cowered under her rule were suddenly bowled free, their voices unchained by the spectacle of her downfall. The HOA board, however, was a different story. They gathered in the clubhouse that very evening, red-faced and sweating, not from the heat, but from panic. I sat in the back row, arms crossed, while my wife stood silently near the door, still in her uniform. Nobody dared to meet her eyes. The board president, a balding man who usually spoke with the booming confidence of a preacher, now mumbled nervously. We condemn the actions of Miss Gibson. Karen the First corrected loudly. He coughed, adjusting his tie. Yes, Karen. Her actions do not reflect the values of this community. We will of course be removing her from her position, effective immediately. No one clapped. No one cheered. The silence was thick. Everyone knew the truth. They had let her run wild unchecked for years. They'd laughed at her jokes, nodded at her complaints, signed off on her nonsense violations. They weren't innocent. They were complicit. My wife finally spoke, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. This community allowed her to escalate unchecked. She terrorized residents, abused her position, and nearly killed someone today. It's not enough to remove her. You need to rebuild trust. The board members squirmed like schoolchildren caught cheating on a test. One finally stammered, Sheriff, we'll review our procedures. Do that, my wife said simply. Then she walked out, leaving them in her shadow. The following days were surreal. News trucks rolled through the neighborhood, reporters in pressed shirts wiping sweat from their foreheads as they stood in front of the blackened SUV carcass. Headlines blared, HOA president arrested after arson incident. Clips of Karen shrieking, I am the HOA, went viral, shared thousands of times with laughing emojis and snarky captions. Kids rode their bikes past our house, pointing at the burned SUV like it was some kind of landmark. Parents whispered apologies when they passed us on evening walks. Some even brought pies or casseroles as if baked goods could erase years of complicity. I won't lie, it felt good, sweet even. Watching people who once looked down on us now shuffle awkwardly, trying to rewrite themselves as allies. I accepted the casseroles, though. No point wasting food. Karen, meanwhile, faced real consequences for the first time in her life. Arson, reckless endangerment, hate crimes enhancements. The list went on. I heard she tried to argue in court that she was acting in the best interests of the HOA, but even the judge had to pause to keep a straight face. Her HOA security goons weren't spared either. Turns out impersonating law enforcement is not something the actual sheriff's department takes lightly. They ended up facing charges of their own, their bravado shriveled into pitiful excuses. The HOA board scrambled to distance themselves, issuing letters full of hollow words. We had no knowledge of Karen's intent. We do not condone violence. We stand united as a community. But neighbors weren't buying it. Attendance at board meetings plummeted. Dues went unpaid. Rumors swirled about disbanding the HOA altogether. Karen had been their iron fist, and without her their authority collapsed like a sandcastle in the tide. Through it all, my wife remained steady. She didn't revel in Karen's downfall, didn't gloat or rub salt in the wound. She treated it like she treated every case, methodical, professional, detached. But in private, with the two of us sitting on the porch in the golden evening light, she'd allow herself the smallest smile. You know, I said one night, sipping a cold beer, I almost feel sorry for her. My wife raised an eyebrow. Do you? I chuckled. Number? Not really. We both laughed. Then the kind of laugh that comes when you've endured something ugly and finally see the other side. The SUV was gone, yes. But in its place stood something stronger, a neighborhood stripped of fear, a board forced to confront its failures, and a reminder to everyone watching that power built on intimidation always burns itself out in the end. Karen had thought she was untouchable. She had thought the HOA gave her authority above the law. But in the end, the law wasn't across town or in some distant office. It was right here, living across the street, drinking iced tea under the afternoon sun. And it had a badge. The funny thing about fire is that once it's gone, it leaves scars you can't ignore. The SUV was nothing but twisted metal parked at the edge of our driveway like a war relic. The HOA clubhouse, once buzzing with Karen's voice, now sat quiet, its windows shuttered during meetings that nobody bothered to attend. Life in Maple Crest Estates changed overnight. Without Karen patrolling like a self-appointed sun goddess, the neighborhood actually felt normal. Kids chalked up the sidewalks without fear of a violation. Neighbors started waving to each other again, as if shaking off years of tension. Someone even dared to paint their shutters blue, a bold rebellion in a place where beige had been law. The HOA board scrambled to maintain control. They mailed out apology letters, scheduled listening sessions, even hired an outside consultant to review their bylaws. But it was too late. Their queen had burned herself out quite literally, and with her went the illusion of power. Most residents stopped paying dues altogether. A few openly pushed to dissolve the HOA. Whether it lived or died, one thing was certain: its reign of intimidation was over. For us, the aftermath was strangely liberating. My wife filed the insurance claim with the same efficiency she brought to every case. Within weeks, a brand new SUV sat in the driveway, shinier, taller, and even more imposing than the one Karen destroyed. Nobody dared say a word about it. If anything, I caught neighbors stealing glances, nodding approvingly as though the vehicle now symbolized safety instead of menace. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same people who once whispered that the SUV lowered property values now used it as a landmark when giving directions. Oh, we're just past the sheriff's house, the one with the big black truck in the driveway. And Karen, well, her face was everywhere. Mugshots don't usually go viral, but hers did. Maybe it was the combination of her smeared lipstick, her sweat-streaked hair, and the wild, unrepentant glare in her eyes. She became an internet punchline. Memes popped up overnight. One showed her pointing at the SUV with the caption, "HOA heating over automobiles." Another had her face photoshopped onto a dragon with the words, "I am the OA." I'd be lying if I said I didn't laugh every time I saw one. The trial came quickly. The evidence was overwhelming. Half the neighborhood had recorded her lighting the car. Her defense was pathetic. She claimed she was performing her civic duty as HOA president. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before convicting her. Last I heard, she was serving a multi-year sentence, banned from holding any position of authority in any HOA ever again. A fitting end for someone who treated a cul-de-sac like a dictatorship. As for my wife, she handled the entire ordeal with grace. She never once bragged, never rubbed her badge in anyone's face. She let the truth do the talking. And when the deputies and neighbors looked at her with new respect, she carried it with quiet dignity. I asked her one evening as we watched the sunset paint the cul-de-sac gold, "Do you ever wish we'd fought back harder sooner, before it got this far?" She sipped her iced tea, eyes calm. "No," she said, "because sometimes the best way to win is to let your enemy show everyone who they really are." Karen did that all on her own, and she was right. In the end, Karen's obsession wasn't our downfall, it was hers. She set the fire, and in doing so burned down her own empire of fear. All we had to do was stand our ground, stay true, and let the sun shine on the truth. If this story taught me anything, it's that real power doesn't scream. It doesn't shove citations under doors or wave a clipboard in your face. Real power is steady, patient, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself because it already speaks for itself. Karen thought authority came from fear and intimidation. She thought that if she shouted loud enough, wrote enough fake violations, and bullied enough neighbors, she could bend reality to her will. But the thing about people like her is they always go too far. And when they do, the truth shines through like sunlight. My wife never once lowered herself to Karen's level. She didn't need to. She stood tall, calm, resolute, and when the moment came, her badge did the talking. For anyone listening, here's the lesson: don't let bullies trick you into believing they have more power than they do. Whether it's an HOA tyrant, a workplace bully, or anyone who abuses their position, stand firm. Document everything. Let patience and truth do the work. Because sooner or later, the mask always slips, and when it does, justice has a way of catching up. So tell me in the comments, have you ever dealt with a Karen who thought they were above the rules? How did you handle it? And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share because you won't want to miss the next HOA story.